Hello guys, welcome to Uzumaki Legends. In this video we will see, what if Naruto learned the art of manipulation from Jiraiya and became the most dangerous gambler with Tsunade and Shizune? Part 1. If you enjoy these kinds of fanfics, please hit the like button and subscribe the channel for more fanfics like this. And now without any further delay, let's start the fanfic. Once more checking herself in the small mirror pinned to the side of the hostel wall, Shizune gave a last, brief look up to her hair, brushed a stray strand away from her face and nodded to herself in satisfaction. Without another glance, the aspiring medical Sannin walked to the door and pulled it open, shoes clicking softly on the polished room flooring and Tun as always at her heels, the sound of the small pig's trotters echoing in a softer counterpart to her owner's heavier tread. Well, this will be interesting if nothing else. The thought swirled around in the young woman's head as she ducked into the spacious bar of the traveling party's lodgings for the evening, itself a damn sight finer than some of the flea pits she'd been forced to slum in during her long, at times tortuous apprenticeship to arguably the finest medical kunoichi to have ever walked the earth, the fiery slug Sannin Tsunade. Though believe me Naruto, nothing will stop me finding out just how you managed to pull this one off. Mastering the Rasengan in 3 days and then using it in a life or death struggle I can just about understand, but this, standing up and seeing a very familiar orange-clad arm waving at her from one of the tables, she let a gracious smile and friendly attitude mask her inner deliberations. This one really puts the Naruto on the ramen. Hey Shizune ne-chan. Her train of thought was jolted on the rails at the Genin's voice, Naruto being as usual oblivious to her inner thoughts as he studied the menu in front of him. I haven't seen the pervert all night. Has the pin-up disappeared as well? Naruto. Shizune instantly defended her sensei, though the struggle to keep the smile off her face was harder than she'd have liked it to be. Don't call Tsunade-sama a pin-up. She's a well-respected Sannin and more than earned her rank. As expected, he merely looked over the top of his menu and shrugged. It's either that or Ba-chan. Once more Shizune's lips flickered before she could iron them straight again, though Tun proved her worth once again by jumping into the seat next to the smaller ninja and placing a trotter on his leg, immediately rewarded with a scratch just behind her ears. Hey Tun, she managed to talk Arrow Sennin out of cooking you for another day then. Too right I did. Just for once the young kunoichi's face darkened as she remembered the laughing toad sage offered the idea up as a change from the packs of ramen Naruto had brought with him. If her scowl hadn't quashed the idea, the impact of her sensei's fist to his jaw a split second later certainly had. Tsunade had always had a soft spot for her apprentices. Pet, anyway, seen anything good on the menu, or is it ramen for you again tonight? Ramen is the kami of foods. Naruto shot back affronted before his sudden ire collapsed in on itself and he muttered mutinously, though they don't serve it here. If I'd known that I'd have made sure I picked somewhere else to stop for the night. It would have been better food and probably cheaper into the bargain. Unable to stop herself this time, Shizune simply watched the blonde ninja pout at the same time as try to get the few pieces of information she had gleaned so far stick together to form something like a picture in her mind. In truth, if was nothing to go on, she'd been as surprised as anyone when, just as Jiraiya had finished collecting firewood from the small copse near the campsite they'd decided on for the night, Naruto had suddenly stood up and declared he was sick of camping out under the stars and was going to do something about it. Before anyone else could stop him, there were hundreds of orange-clad bodies almost tumbling over one another in every direction. Once this mass shadow clone melee had dispersed, Naruto had simply sat back down and resisted all attempts by both Sannin to reveal what he was up to, driving both Jiraiya and Tsunade to distraction by deflecting attention to their age and questionable hobby activities respectively. Eventually, just as dusk began to fall and Shizune started to become seriously worried about both the blonde shinobi's sanity and imminent physical health, Tsunade had that look in her eye that usually spelt murder for anyone standing between her and the nearest bottle of sake. He jumped into the branches of the nearest tree and said, somewhat less than politely, to keep up with him unless they wanted to spend another night in the tents listening to the toad sages, snoring and perverted dreaming giggles. And follow him we did, right to this place. How he'd known exactly where it was the kunoichi wasn't entirely sure. Something else she wanted to find out before the night was over, but it was at the inn he'd eventually led them to that he'd pulled out his biggest surprise. Though whether that was from generosity or to try and ward off the killing intent those two were sending his way I'm not sure. Either way, without turning a hair he'd casually walked in and ordered 2 rooms. Before anyone could muster a protest about how limited funds were at the moment his hand had dived into his bag and withdrawn Gama-chan. The size of the roll of notes the stuffed frog had contained was enough to make even Shizune's eyes widen while Tsunade was virtually drooling at the sight, already translating the cash into bottles of sake and hands of cards she could play at the local gambling table. However, as with most things not related to ninjutsu the money simply hadn't mattered to Naruto. Once the rooms were paid for he took his still considerable amount of change, replaced it in Gama-chan and strolled up the stairs to his room without another word, leaving 2 Sannin and 1 Sannin in training stunned speechless in his wake. From there it had come to this. Her sensei had said nothing beyond a few muttered words that she was going out for the evening with Jiraiya and Shizune hadn't seen her since, leaving her with the proverbial hot potato in her lap. Still, she decided that a little fishing couldn't hurt and, truth be told, she was damned curious as to how the jump-suited shinobi had managed to earn himself such a respectable wad of currency. But even in the little time she'd known him she knew that going in completely open wouldn't quite work with Naruto. Though it often got some results, to get the best reactions out of him, a little tact and a little time were the tools of the trade. Be that as it may, she opened her own menu and smiled at him. I'm glad to be here. It looked like it would rain earlier and I hate waking up to a drizzly morning. Anyway, to answer your question, I don't know where either of them are. Though knowing the pair of them probably having a whale of a time for old time's sake. Naruto grinned. For old time's sake with old timers sake, he quipped, making his partner for the evening sputter before she could control herself. Though how they drink that stuff is beyond me, it's like trying to swallow smoke. You've tried. He shrugged at the question. Ero Sennin gave me a sip out the corner of his saucer once, said it wouldn't do me any harm. He made a bitter face as though tasting something sour. He was half right, which, give him credit, is better than average for him. Shizune shook her head. He's just unstoppable when he's in the right mood. Tsunade, I think you got it right tonight. By now you'd be a quivering mess of either laughter or rage. Maybe, maybe not. You'd be a better judge of that than I would. Still, deciding that was enough of the groundwork laid, the medic Nin leant forward slightly and gestured around the room with her eyes. I must say I'm curious as well as grateful. How did you? Even before she finished she could see from his azure eyes that he'd second-guessed the question. His grin spread even wider, becoming positively fox-like as he quirked an eyebrow towards her, stretching his arms behind his head as he smiled contentedly. I wondered who'd be the first to ask. Have to say I put odds on it being Tsunade Bachan, but, ah well, can't win them all. He suddenly chuckled at a joke Shizune presumed she wasn't privy to before finishing, just as long as you win the important ones, hey. I suppose, the medical kunoichi answered after a long second's pause before, realizing she was hooked, decided to hold her breath and take the plunge feet first. Am I going to regret asking or can I back out now? To her complete non-surprise, Naruto shook his head, smile now just about separating his head into two. No place for quitters here, Nichan. Okay, I'll spill. He leant across the table again, lowering his voice. Just one thing though. Don't tell either of the others because, well, I'm sure one would kill me and the other. He tailed off, shuddering. I don't even want to think about that. Okay. Silence is golden, Shizune said almost without realizing her lips had moved. Before she could get too far ahead of herself, however, Naruto had spoke again. Suits me. Fine, well, To tell this one I've got to go back a few steps. Remember the bet I had with Bachan about this? His hand disappeared beneath the neck of his shirt and emerged a second later with a necklace of black rock held beneath it. Seeing it, Shizune nodded. How could she not remember that? Yes, of course I do. You won when you got Jiraiya-sama too. No, 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 Naruto cut her off gently before giving a mental prod. The other bet. At the mere mention of this memory, Shizune felt her cheeks go red and her face fall into her hands. True enough, this was another memory she'd never get rid of, this one for all the wrong reasons. How could I forget? I've never been so embarrassed in public in all my life, and this is coming from someone who's been living with Tsunade for the past Kami alone knows how many years. Tsunade, the world's worst gambler and second worst drunk who occasionally pieces together someone important enough to keep the debtors off our backs for a few weeks. I was just forgetting that nightmare. Why'd you have to go and dredge it up again? Because. Suddenly Shizune felt the skin on the back of her neck prickle. If his voice were any lower he'd be purring. What's he got up his sleeve this time? There was a bit more to that bet than met the eye. I never thought I'd say it, but looks like the arrow Sannin was right. The voice cut through the smoky atmosphere of the gambling den like a thrown kunai. You really suck at this. Beat it, Gaki. Tsunade grumbled out the corner of her mouth as she scooped her cards up. You're throwing me off my game. Shizune sat at the side of the Sannin with an expression that spoke volumes of how often she'd been here before, saw his eyes skirt over how few chips lay on Tsunade's side of the table and mentally counted down. 3, 2, 1. What game? The let's give my money to the casino game. It's about the only one you can play well. Your luck's worse than that barbecue in Konoha that had offered an all-you-can-eat buffet on Choji's birthday. The cards in Tsunade's hand started to crinkle from her grip as she turned her slightly bloodshot eyes towards the boy smirking just off to her left. I won't say it again, Gaki, she stated clearly, killer intent starting to leak from her body as she took in her latest antagonist. Beat it, unless you've got that air ball mastered yet. I've nothing to say to you. Those words hit a nerve. For the first time Naruto winced and, as he drew his right hand out from behind him, so did Shizune. It was blistered and blackened, showing symptoms of chakra burn as well as heavy impact damage. It was obviously a hand that had seen some very heavy abuse during his training. It's coming, he remarked semi-cheerfully, obviously wanting to change the subject. Anyway, I'll just watch. Jiraiya told me to wait here while he did his research. Shizune was grateful to see that his expression at those words matched her own. Obviously the super pervert hadn't corrupted the boy's mind entirely yet, though his face brightened as he finally picked her out from the drab curtains at her back. Hey Shizune Ni-chan, Tun. Hearing her name, the pig pricked her ears and stood up from where she'd been laying at her owner's side, hopping off the flat cushion and trotting smartly over to where Naruto sat down. As he patted his lap, the pig gratefully jumped into it, closing her eyes as she received a pleasing back rub. Though at first Naruto had been a little wary of Tun, wondering who in their right mind would want a pig as a pet rather than a more useful, aggressive animal like a tiger, he'd come to see her as something similar to a chubbier, hairless version of a Kumaru, though with less hair and, more importantly to him, less of an odor problem, especially following rain of any kind. Anyway, true to his word, he merely watched quietly as the game wore on, not making a comment or a sound no matter how often Tsunade cursed, swore and railed against the fates as she lost hand after hand and pot after pot until, finally broke, the Sannin threw down her last hand accursed foully. Arg, damn it all. Shizune, oh no. The assistant Kunoichi had been hoping the sake would blur her sensei's perception enough to make her forget she was there at all, but obviously there was no such luck to be had this time. Get another 1,000, and a better bottle of sake. This one tasted like it came out a cow. But Tsunade-sama, it was probably a hopeless effort, but she had to try anyway. We need that money for. Here we go then. It had been a lost cause from the outset, but Seeing the way the slug Sennin's eyes suddenly flashed, Shizune braced herself to prepare for the worst. However, her deliverance came from the most unlikely source imaginable. "You don't need money, Bachan," Naruto said calmly, rummaging in his pocket for something. "I've got what you need right here." As Gama-chan was brought into the air, Shizune breathed a silent sigh of relief. The sight of money, especially someone else's money, was always enough to turn Tsunade's head for a few minutes at least. However, her relief curdled into confusion a few seconds later as, rather than unclip the frog wallet, Naruto instead flipped it over and undid a tiny zip along the belly of the little green beast. A couple of fingers slipped inside and, with an exclamation of triumph a second later, Konoha's #1 knucklehead pulled something from its recesses into the light, holding his prize up for all to see. "Behold," he demanded, the light catching off the coin in his hand, "my lucky charm." "Lucky charm," Tsunade repeated in a dead tone of voice, taking in the grubby, slightly battered form of the silver of metal before her. "How in Kami's name has that thing ever been lucky? It's got you as an owner, hasn't it?" Ignoring the barb, Naruto merely explained in his own time. "Found it one night when I was out for my evening jog," he mentioned, casually ignoring the circumstances behind said jog, including a mob of angry, possibly drunken villagers and several heavy items landing within inches of his heels. "I can always call right with this coin, doesn't matter how often, it's never wrong." "Really? You bet. Look, Dragon." He held one head of the coin towards both sensei and apprentice, letting them see the slightly faded metal face of the mythical beast staring at them from the minted surface before flipping it over. "And Dragon," he explained, the two sinuous tails entwined on the rear of the coin proving him right, "it never loses." A double-headed coin? Well, sort of. Technically it wasn't double-headed, but, going by Naruto's logic, it was hard to call it otherwise. The offer wasn't something a professional gambler like Tsunade was going to miss, but it was his next words that brought her up sharp. "How about a wager?" Oh no. If there was one sentence in the world Shizune hated, other than, "just one more for the road," it was that one. Her mentor could never turn down a challenge, and she could understand that in a way. It was just the fact that she could never win them either that irked Shizune the most. As usual though, Tsunade simply suspended her common sense and let her addiction take over in her mind as she swiveled in her seat to face the other blonde. "You're on, Gaki," she grated, cracking her knuckles. "What's the bet?" This, Naruto idly flipped the coin and caught it on the back of his hand before pointing at what, at first looked to be a very rude and, from his point of view, very unwise place to be looking, for that necklace. "Don't worry, Bachan," he said, half mocking and half sincere as Tsunade's hand instinctively flexed to her neck. "I'll make a gamble even, you can win." "No." Shizune shook her head, absolutely convinced that this was the one wager not even Tsunade would take up. Not for something that precious to her heart. Not for that, not even she would. "I'm listening, Gaki. Make it good." As her apprentice all put face planted in shock, the Sennin gulped the rest of her sake down in one, though her eyes never left the new opponent in front of her as he stood up, dislodging Tun-Tun, who jumped to the floor with an irritated snort before pacing back to his owner and jumped into her arms. "My time usually costs money, a lot of money." "Can't think why," Naruto muttered under his breath before speaking properly, holding up his hand for all to see. "Okay. You're a medic nin. Kami help us." Tsunade growled softly but let him carry on. "So you probably know better than I do how screwed up this hand is. I can barely feel it even now." "The bet's this. You remember the first thing you learn in the academy to get your hand-eye coordination up to speed. You can remember that far back one more word, Gaki, and I'll hit you so hard your ancestors'll wince." The slug sage snarled, temper already irked by her consistent bad luck so far in the night. "But yes, I know what you're on about." With a flourish, Tsunade lifted the necklace up and held it by its string, letting it sway softly. "So, You're betting you can catch this out the air while I'm swinging it with your bad hand. At his nod the Sannin laughed, clapping her hands harshly. You're on Gaki. Tonight my bad luck lifts forever, no way you can do it. He snorted and rolled his eyes. That's the idea, Bachan. In fact, just to make sure of it, I'll have my eyes shut when I doing it. He boasted boldly. At this Tsunade simply cackled and reached forwards eagerly, grabbing his nearest hand and seemingly unaware as her opponent nearly fainted at the sudden explosion of pain from the end of his arm. You're on. Shizune, you're our spotter. Make sure the little baka doesn't try to pull a fast one. With a resigned sigh, the younger woman stood up slowly and squeezed past her seated sensei with Tun in her arms, coming to a halt just behind where Naruto was now stood and standing with her arms folded. She stood in that position for no longer than a few moments before almost leaping through the roof in shock as a heavy hand slapped down on her shoulder. Sorry I'm late. Hope the Gaki wasn't any trouble, Jiraiya. It was indeed the Toad Sage who had startled her so, his rough voice softening as he looked past her at where his student stood facing off against his old teammate. What's going on? Some kind of crazy bet. Shizune sighed as Tsunade suddenly twisted her wrist and the necklace went from stationary to a propeller, blurring and humming through the air as Naruto tensed up. The necklace against some kind of lucky coin Naruto has. He has to catch the necklace with his eyes shut in his bad hand to win. She felt rather than heard the older man snort, feeling the creasing of the fabric around him as he folded his arms. A bet she might finally win at last, he said eventually, seeing the muscles in his student's back tense. The moment of the strike was merely seconds away. What is Naruto up? It was a sentence he never finished as, at that precise second, the blonde boy's hand whipped forwards. A second after that, a complete hush fell over the gambling den like a funeral shroud. Shizune felt the blood drain from her face as her hands flew to her cheeks, eyes almost bulging from her head as she tried, and failed, to take in the scene before her, Tun falling to the floor with an outraged squeal. All that was running through her head were two thoughts. How on earth did this happen? And, how am I going to put him back together when she gets through with him afterwards? As Jiraiya was borne away to the happy place perverts go whenever they see one of their lifelong fantasies acted out before their eyes on the back of an S-class nosebleed, the only thing souring his sensation of ecstatic bliss was the disappointment that it hadn't been him who had the courage to act out his fantasies. As he felt his fist snap closed over something, even over the throb of agony from his injured arms, Naruto felt himself flushed with triumph. Looks like you really have the worst luck in the world, Bachan. You have to pay up. It was only then, as he opened his eyes to see Tsunade's eyes inches from his own, mouth open in a perfect O of shock, that he realized something wasn't quite right with the situation. However, it was only when he rolled his eyes downwards that his eyes bulged out and his mouth ran dry that he finally understood what it was that was keeping his hand so unfeasibly warm. Without thinking or releasing his grip, Naruto ripped his hand back out of the proverbial danger zone. Unfortunately, as Tsunade, like most kunoichi, wrapped herself rather than wore anything else, and Naruto had inadvertently grabbed a large handful of the aforementioned wrappings. This wrenching motion resulted in the exposure of the slug Sannin's heaving bosom to the majority of the gambling den, most of the assembled men simply passing out on the spot from an unexpected pleasure overload. Naruto finally let go as Tsunade hastily fought to stuff her dignity, amongst other things, back down her blouse, face aflame and pride in tatters as she was rendered speechless by the inadvertent violation. How did that happen? Finally managing to spark some life back into her previously spinning mind, the kunoichi tried to rationalize that she had just let someone barely out of his teens get hold of something that most of the men in her life had been lusting after forever. There's no way. This is just a bad dream, a genjutsu, a quick release and I'll be back in the gambling den, wasted on sake. You know, I always wondered where medic nins kept their bandages. The beautiful illusion was shattered by the knucklehead's words, Naruto's face still as red as hers as he looked away in a belated attempt to give her some privacy. Is that why they're always nice and warm when you use them? Shock once more blanketed her mind. Nothing was present in her mind, not reason, logic or even good old-fashioned bone-breaking anger could sparkle in her mind in the face of such a blatant cheek after his earlier, unforgivable conduct. She could only watch, open-mouthed still, as with a sigh he slowly slipped his uninjured hand into his pocket and reluctantly pulled out the coin he'd shown them all earlier and, even more reluctantly, offered it forwards. Oh well, all good things come to an end. Here, the little disc of metal winked and flashed in front of her unfocused eyes as he waved it in front of her, obviously wanting her to take it. You won it, Tsunade-sama. Hope it's as lucky for you as it was for me, you sure need it. As though in a dream, the Sannin lifted one leaden hand and plucked the coin from his fingers, marveling at the feel of the cold, rough metal between her fingertips as the Gaki's words echoed in her head. You won, you won, you won. I won, she breathed, the message finally sinking in as she clenched the coin in her fist. I won. This is it. The curse is broken. Suddenly, madly delirious joy surged through her veins as she clutched the spoils of her victorious bet to her recently ruffled chest. Grin almost as wide as Naruto's usually was and laughter echoing raucously all around her. I'm on a roll. Nothing can stop me now. Shizune. Shizune-chan, stop gawping like a landed flounder and get some more chips. With the speed of a demon and predatory gaze of a hawk she pounced on and began shuffling the deck, apparently unaware that all her former player partners were currently sprawled out unconscious with extreme blood loss from their noses and happy smiles on their faces as she slammed the cards down on the table. The winning streak starts here. Even now that image lingered in her mind. Almost an unprecedented length of time for someone whose best friend in the world was legendary, almost as much for her drinking and gambling as she was for her medical skills. Shizune once more fought down the blush in her cheeks as she grappled with the memory, glaring across the table at her diminutive partner as he beamed across at her as though butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. Why'd you have to go and dredge that old ghost up? She demanded with a hint of irritation, though, hand on heart, she doubted she'd ever feel truly angry with Naruto for any reason. In that regard she imagined she was very much like her sensei, however much the Sannin might have openly cursed the blonde shinobi's name. For his part Naruto merely reclined in his seat, smirking as he steepled his fingers on his stomach. Well, I brought it up because I needed to. Before she could question him further, he answered her in spoken question. Ever heard the phrase, lose some to win some? Well, that's what I did that night. You know, he beckoned her over with a conspiratorial wink. If there's one thing I've learned traveling with Jiraiya-sama, it's that the more perverted the man, the easier he can be manipulated. What? Totally bamboozled by now, Shizune could only offer a blank look that had Naruto chuckling again. I was watching while I waited for the game to finish, and the owner of that place didn't get his eyes past Tsunade's neckline once all night. About the only thing holding him back was the fact that death by angry botchan would be long, painful and, worst of all, excruciatingly embarrassing. So, what's that got to do with everything? All I did was make a little bet with him before playing my game with Granny, the boy explained, eyes sparkling with glee and triumph. I bet him his whole night's takings that I could cop a better feel off Tsunade than anyone else in the bar all night without getting punched halfway to Iowa in retaliation. The jokes afterwards, well, he shrugged as Shizune's jaw dropped, that was just fun. Do you know how much a place like that turns over in a night? Enough to keep us happy as Tun in mud until we get back to Konoha. The silence that followed that announcement was so deep it was almost profound. Between the flabbergasted kunoichi and gleefully satisfied shinobi existed a gulf of understanding so wide a cloister of monks could have meditated for years and not come even close to understanding it. It seemed too immense, so monolithic, that nothing either of them did could break it, and indeed nothing either of them did. It was only the sound of a smashing bottle from somewhere behind them that made both their heads turn. A few tables behind them, an old woman was coming to her feet in a puddle of spilt sake and broken glass with far too much speed and agility for someone of such advanced age, and the even older man by her side. No way he was that old if he could vault over the table like that. As Naruto felt a cold, hard ball of dread solidify and drop into his stomach like one of Sakura's rice balls, there was the charismatic cloud of a dispelling henge and a sudden band of pressure constricted his knees, Jiraiya hugging him as though her were life itself as tears poured from his eyes. "Teach me, O master." Dropping his grip, the toad Sannin dropped prostrate to the floor, voice muffled as he spoke directly into the floorboards. "Ask anything of me and it's yours. Any jutsu, any money, the entire first collection of Ika Ika Paradise signed and illustrated. Just tell me your secret in the ways of women." Luckily at that point the perverted arrow Sennin's tirade came to an end courtesy of an enraged Tsunade's boot landing in his side with a painful crunch. He crashed into the doorframe at the opposite end of the room with a resounding thunk and lay still, twitching occasionally as his ungentlemanly desires ran rampant in his comatose subconscious. In the meantime Naruto was busy mentally composing his own death poem at extremely short notice as the extremely enraged slug sage whipped her head around to him. Fist clenched and murder in her eyes as what he'd said to Shizune in supposed confidence echoed in her head. The kunoichi glared down at the genin as though he were a worm on a dissection board, sizing him up as though where to make the first of 1,000 deadly, painful cuts that would be his end. Meep. At once her burning gaze traveled, singed the air and flayed her apprentice alive. Shizune had one hand clamped hard to her mouth, face rapidly purpling as noises like a mouse being strangled escaped from her pinched lips. Faced with such base betrayal, the Sannin merely felt her rage swell to epic proportions. Such a destructive force coalesced inside a single mortal being that would have made the Kyuubi no Kitsune itself back down in terror. With breath all but smoking from her lips, Tsunade extended in single, deadly digit towards where Shizune flopped over sideways on the seat, still trying to choke off her laughter as best she could. "Traitor!" The Sannin ground out before transferring her attention back to Naruto, fully expecting the boy to have passed out after exposure to such a potent killing intent. Instead, incredibly, his gaze was set towards the entrance of the inn, eyes huge and terrified as he pointed and gabbled desperately. "Debt collectors, bailiffs." At that her anger left her for a moment, fled and run away as she jumped back, excuses already in her mind and on our lips. "I swear I'll pay you next month," she shouted, hands up as though pushing a foe away. "I just need a few more There was no one there. She turned back in confusion, just in time to see an orange-clad form vault over Jiraiya's prone form and run like hell for the stairs of the inn. Realizing she'd been had twice in a week by the same shinobi, Tsunade's wrath exploded again, this new wrath eclipsing its predecessor like a bonfire would outside a candle. Without another word she charged in pursuit of the jump-suited posterior, screaming at Naruto to stand and fight like a man. Not hearing as Shizune finally broke down completely, hugging her stomach as the laughter roared out of her unstoppably, her mirth only spurred on further as she heard the muted thunder of feet on the floor above her and snatched of conversation filtered down to her ears. "You can't run forever. Watch me try. Stop dodging around the table, to the decent thing and receive a beating. I'll even heal you when I've finished. You can't say fairer than that." "Fairer than that? Man Bachin, is there anything you can't lose at? Yipe. Die." I was worried about settling down in Konoha once. In the small part of Shizune's mind that could still think rationally instead of simply babbling with uncontrollable hysteria, the trainee medical Sannin decided that she might be able to return to her former home at last. But on this evidence, it's going to be an absolute riot. In the village hidden in the leaves, in the Hokage's office, many unusual things were happening. The elite Anbu unit, sworn protectors of the venerable Hokage himself and ninja without compare, were stunned into absolute speechlessness, swords hanging slack by their sides and fingers that could have summoned city-leveling jutsus in an eye blink completely still, faces as frozen as the masks that covered their faces and identities. The resident genjutsu mistress was trying frantically to dispel the illusion before her, knowing what she was seeing could not be reality. Even as she focused and released her chakra, however, a small sliver of her mind was a little disappointed that she'd have to break such a wonderful illusion. It wasn't every day that she could look one of the most notorious perverts in the leaf in the eye without having to peer over the cover of the book she despised so much. The father and son duo of smokers were currently not partaking in their usual vice. The younger of the two didn't seem to have realized that the cigarette he'd been about to light was now on the floor rather than between his lips, and he was in danger of setting his beard on fire with the lighter spluttering in his slack fingers, while the elder, having dropped his pipe on the desk and overcome his shock slightly quicker than the younger shinobi around him, tried to subtly waft the ashes towards the resident paperwork mountain while everyone else was gaping at the apparition before them. Meanwhile, the reason for all this commotion seemed oblivious to the reactions around him and merely stood leant against the wall next to the window he'd come in from, chin in his hand and a far-away look in the eye not covered by his slanting headband, seemingly considering a weighty matter indeed. It was a tableau that could have been frozen in time forever, and indeed looked like it would. It was only the scent of burning parchment that seemed to snap at least one of the assembled zombies back into the real world. Hokage-sama. There was a sudden hiss as a low-level water jutsu drenched the smoldering pile of paper on the desk of the aged village leader. That went about as well as I could have hoped. I might even get a few hours relaxation today. Keeping the glee of outwitting and banishing the bane of all cages for the moment off his wrinkled face, Sarutobi looked towards the Anbu who'd put out the fire and nodded gravely in thanks before turning his attention back to the root of the issue before him. Nay, Kakashi. The masked ninja blinked as though shocked at the voice before shaking himself and looking at his superior. Hi Hokage-sama. No excuse. Nothing. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. This was unusual and he didn't like unusual. It usually meant there was trouble on the way and he'd dealt with enough of that to last several lifetimes. You are on time and you don't seem to have your usual reading material with you. Knowing what day it is today, I assume this may be due to the results of your genin test. Not that I would blame you if it was. Despite himself, the Hokage smiled fondly, knowing one of the members of the cell Kakashi had tested and wondering if the bewhiskered shinobi had once again done the impossible and broken one of his finest ninja of his virtually lifelong tardiness habit. Naruto is the cage killer for a reason. I imagine a former Anbu captain would be easy meat for him now. With those words, the tension in the room was broken and fled like a pack of Inuzuka dogs threatened with bathwater and shampoo. Everyone in the office relaxed, least of all Kakashi himself. Giving his infamous eye smile, the masked ninja chuckled before speaking again. Cage killer that does surprise me, though I suppose it shouldn't, knowing what I know about him now. He's the reason I'm here, distracted me enough that I didn't keep an eye on the time like I should have. For once in your life, Kurenai muttered just loud enough to hear, a little annoyed that Kakashi had turned out to be real rather than a new illusion technique she could learn. At least there's no lame excuse this time. The older nin simply smiled again before continuing as though the raven-haired kunoichi hadn't spoken. But aside from that, I wanted a little advice before I made a decision on the fate of Team 7. That was enough to get all attention focused on the man. Very few people in the room had ever known Kakashi be stumped by a problem, least of all one that seemed to be posed by a mere genin of all things, even one containing a mythical biju. Even Sarutobi raised an eyebrow at the declaration before his analytical mind. The prized asset that had allowed him to attain his prestigious title of God of Shinobi went to work on the problem. I see. You gave them your standard bell test, I assume. Hi. It went as well as it usually does. A collective wince ran around the room. The bell test was almost as infamous amongst the ninja of Konoha as Tora the cat. The reason Kakashi had never passed his genin team. But while it was going on, I had some shadow clones watching my team, and Naruto's behavior was a little unusual. Unusual, Asuma repeated, seeking a nicotine buzz to aid his thinking as he stooped down to retrieve his dropped cigarette, taking the opportunity to sneak a glance at Kurenai's shapely derriere as he did so. Unusual how? Last I heard he was a kid who couldn't sit still and would tell anyone who got close enough he was going to take Pop's job one day. He was, Kakashi said with another of his smiles, tried to attack me before I said go, and when I did and the other two scattered, he just stood there waiting for a fight. Said he wanted to check something. His taijutsu is abysmal, by the way. Even with those shadow clones he uses he didn't come close, though I doubt he'll sit down tonight to think about it. Seeing a few raised eyebrows among the newer Junin, he brought his fingers together in a tiger seal, sending another wince rippling through the assembled crowd. Shifting uncomfortably in his seat as unpleasant memories of his own graduation came back to him, Sarutobi cleared his throat and tried to move the discussion on. I see. Any idea what he wanted to check? No, at least, I didn't then, but I'll come back to that. The Scarecrow replied, all business in his tone now as he recounted the remainder of his test. After I left him to cool down near the river with a shadow clone to keep an eye on him, I went after the others. The girl needs help. She fell apart in a fairly low-level genjutsu and is a fangirl of the highest order. She'll need some help to break out of that mentality before it gets her killed. Almost without meaning to, he saw Kurenai's face harden into a scowl. Good. If I can get her on my side, that might sugar the pill for what I want to do with these three. And the Uchiha, well, not as gifted as he likes to think he is, though his fire affinity is quite well developed. He has no sense of teamwork and an ego bigger than the Hokage monument. The title Rookie of the Year has gone to his head and it needs work to puncture it. As is always the way, I think Guy is still struggling with that Hyuga from last year. One of the other Junins piped up, pushing his glasses up his nose as he did so they didn't work together then. Kakashi shook his head. No, though the clone I left with Naruto reported some interesting things. After I left him he tried to track me down. Pretty well as my clone almost lost him a few times, but when he came across Sakura he didn't help her immediately, which was odd. He took off her headband and did something to it, couldn't see what, before replacing it and waking her up. What happened then? Asuma asked, curious as in all the time he'd known Naruto, he'd never seen or heard of the boy not coming to the help of one of his precious people immediately, and Sakura is nothing is not precious to him, though Kami alone knows why. He got a punch on the head, a short rant that he'd never be as good as her Sasuke-kun, and a declaration that she was going to find the Uchiha and prove love conquers all. Kakashi smirked behind his mask as he realized his numerous prods were having the desired effect. Kurenai was looking almost murderous by now. Then she left, the wrong way by the way, before Naruto picked himself up and sent a shadow clone after her. After that he shot off looking for Sasuke. Did he find him? Yes. It wasn't hard. The Uchiha wasn't going anywhere fast. In fact, buried up to his neck he wasn't going anywhere at all. The image got a few smirks, even an outright chuckle from Aoba, sensei of Team 2 and well known as the Junin with a sense of fun almost as keen as Naruto's. As expected of the only ninja ever to prank Mitarashi Anko and live to tell the tale. Of course Naruto found him and promptly fell over laughing. The look on Sasuke's face was worth 1,000 words. Even more so when Naruto took off his headband, just to check if this thing was real. Aoba was outright snorting by now, half hunched over and probably, Kakashi guessed, cursing that Naruto hadn't been on his squad, but after that he replaced it and summoned some clones to help dig him up. As he was doing this Sakura finally arrived and started to help, which quite surprised me. Naruto was saying he'd trapped an area of the training ground but the others weren't listening from what I could see and hear. Sasuke was convinced he could go it alone and Sakura was right behind him, but before anything else could happen the buzzer went off. The anticlimactic ending seemed to depress the whole room. Despite himself, Kakashi was quite the storyteller when it came to descriptions such as this. Sarutobi remembered that even as a genin he could turn a standard capture Tora mission report into a heart-pounding chase across most of Fire Country while dodging villagers and missing nin alike. Though that was before he lost his team and sensei. It is a shame you've never been able to let that go, Kakashi. The future is a brighter place than you can see, even with the Sharingan. So, they didn't pass then. One of the assembled Junin, Genma, ventured, rolling his ever-present Senbon across his lips as he did so. The council's going to raise hell over this, the last Uchiha going back to the academy for another year. The thought was enough to make Sarutobi groan and reach for the headache medicine secreted in a corner of one of his desk drawers before another voice cut across his depressed thoughts. Ma, not so fast, Kakashi mentioned lightly, making everyone look up at him again. I wasn't finished. Yes, they were out of time, but one of them wasn't out of ideas. I appeared with my usual dramatic flair and took them back to the training posts before roping Naruto to one of them. Why him? Though he'd not had much to do with the boy beyond being dragged into the odd chase as the boy sought to get out of town following some prank or other, Aoba felt compelled to stand up for a fellow prankster in need. From what you've told us, he did the best out of all of them. Certainly better than the girl in the squad. No offense, Kurenai-san, he added hastily, remembering present company and ensuring the kunoichi knew he meant no offense to her gender. Before the genjutsu mistress could reply though, she was cut off by Kakashi himself, a brisker, more business-like tone to his voice now. I had to in order have any chance of their second chance working. If I'd used Sasuke, Sakura would have fed him regardless of what I said. If I'd used Sakura, Naruto would have done the same. It wasn't fair, but it had to be him. Thing was, after I'd tied him, put down the hissy fit Sasuke threw and explained the rules, Naruto threw a shuriken in the works. But if anyone feeds Naruto before the second test starts, you all fail regardless. Having said his piece, Kakashi prepared to vanish away before a sudden voice, or more accurately the claim that voice was making, made him pause. Nay, Kakashi-sensei, we don't need another chance. Is he for real? Looking over at the restrained member of Team 7 with a hardened eye, the Junin was pleased to see the boy squirm a little before dropping his gaze to the floor. Oh, and why do you have any reason to say that? At least your teammates may have a chance to graduate if you pull your weight. It was a little harsh, especially as Kakashi had seen it wasn't true. In his opinion, Naruto had a lot of potential untapped, and he knew at least some of that was due to neglect at the academy. But having lived through and grown up in wartime, the older ninja belonged firmly in the tough love camp. If mere words were enough to break a ninja, what good could he be where the kunai were flying and all hell was breaking loose? He was expecting disappointment, possibly even tears for trampling so casually on a dream he knew Naruto cherished. What he did not expect was for the demon vessel to suddenly look up, face ablaze with a grin that shone more brightly than any ration jutsu and lightness in his voice. I don't have to say anything. Sakura-chan, Sasuke-tem. He nodded at each of his teammates in turn. Undo your headbands. Obviously, Kakashi wasn't the only one who thought the boy had lost his marbles. What are you talking about, Dobi? Naruto Baka, stop trying to show off and be cool like Sasuke-kun. We're all in trouble because of you. Shut up before you make it worse. From where I'm standing it can't get worse, he shot back, trying to shrug as best he could with his shoulders wrapped up by ropes. Just do it. Interested despite himself, Kakashi looked over the top of his book and reluctantly removed his eyes from the inspired scribblings in time to see his other two students shared a look before. With a final huff, Sakura reached up and roughly pulled on the cloth of her headband, tugging the whole thing off and letting her pink hair spill over her face and down the back of her neck. There, okay Baka, what was the big A musical tinkle by her feet made her pause. At the same time, the grin on Naruto's face threatened to consume half his head, and Kakashi came closer than he'd ever thought possible to dropping his beloved Ica Ica Paradise Limited Color Edition, signed by the author. Rolled up against the cherry blossom girl's left foot was a small, slightly battered toy bell. All was still, each of the assembled nins gawking at the tiny toy before. With a strangled cry, Sasuke almost ripped his own headband off without undoing the knot. Sliding the cloth through his fingers, the so-called prodigy let out a very un-Uchiha gasp as the second bell fell into his palm. Seeing this, Kakashi whipped his free hand down to his belt. As he drew his hand up, he was equal parts confused and relieved to see the two bells still attached to his belt. He cheated. He must have extra. That comforting line of reasoning was cruelly ripped away from him as both bells in his hands exploded in clouds of smoke. Shadow clones, hanged shadow clones. Their chakra constructs so are virtually weightless. I never noticed. How did he pull the switch? Before he could think too long on the matter, however, there was a strangled scream from the student who appeared to have tricked him. Naruto. Despite her apparent dislike of the boy, it seemed Sakura had her heart in the right place. Seeing Naruto's face drain to the pallor of a corpse and his body fold in on itself as a response to some pain she couldn't see, the girl was at his side in a heartbeat, trying to inspect the damage. Kakashi started forwards as well, stepping past the still stunned Sasuke, though even as he did so it appeared Konoha's #1 surprising ninja was recovering. There was a little more color in his cheeks and his breathing seemed to even out a little as he looked up and managed a grimacing smile. I just learnt something, he shuddered again before continuing, about shadow clones. Really? Feigning boredom now the crisis appeared to be over, though his mind was racing a million miles a minute behind his mask. Kakashi examined his book again. What was that? When you dispel a shadow clone, Naruto continued in a labored tone, shaking like someone who'd either just run a marathon or had a little chat with Ibiki and Anko over a cup of tea and a hot branding iron, you get all its memories and experiences. So, stepping back as she realized there was nothing wrong with her teammate, Sakura folded her arms with a firm, if accepting expression. What's that got to do with anything? Naruto turned to look at her with a pained grin. Well, this is awkward. Put it this way, Sakura-chan, if it had been me dangling like those bell clones were, I'd probably make the male star of Kakashi-sensei's porn book green with envy right about now. Kakashi paused, wiping his fingertips across the back of his Junin pants at this point as the majority of the Hokage's office winced and moaned from the sympathy pains from an important part of their anatomy. Unfortunately, Kurenai, not affected beyond a quirking of the eyebrow and a sudden smirk on her lips, spoke up. Really? Might have to suggest that one to Anko sometime. Without meaning to, she saw several of the men around her wince again, Aoba almost turning green as he realized if that did happen he was going to be first in the firing line. But, Naruto, he passed the bell test. Solo. It looked that way. The copy nin confirmed before seeming to remember something and looking at the Hokage. Hokage-sama, would it be possible for you to summon Yumino Iruka here? I need him to confirm a few things after this story is over. Sarutobi nodded, dispatching an Anbu to the task with a flick of his hand before looking over at Kakashi once more. He'll be here shortly, assuming they've let him off of the hospital probationary period yet. Anyway, continue Kakashi, I'm sure all of us here want to know how Naruto-kun pulled this one off. And that, Kakashi filled in with a deep eye smile and chuckle as he leant back against the wall, is a story well worth me telling. It took a few seconds to sink in, but, when it did, it didn't take more than a split second for Sakura to sink her fist right into the helpless boy's cheek. You perverted baka. Hey, ow, it wasn't my fault. Naruto tried to defend himself as much as he was able to, writhing against the post to try and avoid Sakura's assault. Kakauchi sensei picked them UUUKK. Ma. Sakura-chan. Kakashi decided to cut in at this point, his facade of boredom as rigid as ever as the pink-haired girl looked up at him, letting Naruto fall slack against the ropes as he tried desperately to breathe again. Don't kill your teammate, you might need him later on, especially as he managed to get both bells. How did you do that, Naruto? And I want the truth. Though the tone was light and words spoken almost in jest, Naruto had spent enough time around and running away from ninja to know a command when he heard it. Sucking down a second breath, the boy began his tale. Well, I started after you did that smoke disappearing thingy yesterday. You said about your test and I wanted to find out about it. So I went and asked Iruka-sensei if he knew anything about you. Said I owed him some ramen and wanted to say thanks for caring. You know, after what happened with Mizuki Tem. Despite himself, Naruto smiled at the memory, though it was and probably always be bittersweet knowledge for him. So we went to see Ayame-chan and old man Tuki. He told me he couldn't tell me about your test, but he said you were always late and about the book you're always reading. He also said something else that caught my interest. Oh really? As the whiskered visage leant forwards to look at him directly, Kakashi raised his visible eyebrow, wondering what the scarred Chunin could have told his adopted little brother. He told me that you've never passed a genin team before. At those words the temperature dropped several degrees. Even the ice cube of the academy, the sculptured god Sasuke Uchiha, shivered as that particular nugget of information was unearthed, though as usual it was water of a duck's back for Kakashi. And it's true, I never have, he mentioned as though commenting on the weather before dragging the conversation back on track. Though knowing this, what did you do then? Oh, that was easy. Naruto explained brightly. Junin senseis always keep the same team number, so all I did was go back into the academy and trawl the records. I looked up the names of the previous Team 7 members you failed. Just out of luck I knew one of them, or at least I've heard the name. Kuruda Jozo, he's a civilian now, helps out at that clothing and cleaning store I turned neon orange about a month ago. Ah, I remember that one. The Hyuga were most upset you chose that particular day for a prank. Not least because it was their washing day. I've never seen Heishi go as red as his daughter before, and in the middle of a council meeting too. Inuzuka-sun might still be laughing now. He'd been on duty in the council meeting that day and was sure that the Hyuga clan head's expression as the branch family member whispered the message that most of the clan's traditionally white clothing was now glowing in the dark would never leave his memory. It was probably due to her and some of the other clan heads having a sense of humor that the execution order Heishi tried to put on you failed. Naruto, true to form, the prankster in question was oblivious to his inner thoughts and instead merely glared at no one in particular. Well, that'll teach their gate guards to kick mud at me as I'm walking past, he muttered, though not low enough to evade Kakashi's chakra-enhanced hearing. But anyway, I knew where he was and I knew he'd know what your test was, so I went and asked him. The brass neck of the child in front of him almost made the copy nin gape. It was something so far out of the bathtub that in an obscure way he was as surprised as he was disappointed that no one had thought of it before, himself included. Keeping such feelings to himself, he was surprised to hear the next question he had planned asked by a voice that wasn't his. But why would he want to talk to you? Despite her personal feelings for the boy in question, Sakura was naturally a curious person. You just said you'd pranked his business. I know I'd just kick you out on the street. And you wouldn't be the first, but much as I never thought I'd say this, being Uchiha smooths all paths. Before too much confusion could reign, Naruto seized the reins and explained. I knew Sasuke would just go home brooding after Sensei vanished. Kami knows it's all he did through the academy, so I hanged into him when I went in. Of course everyone just fell over themselves to answer what I wanted to know. Kuruda was singing like a bird and I got what I wanted to know like it was nothing. So this whole test, he shrugged again, sniggering a little at the violated look on Sasuke's face. I knew it was coming, and I made a plan for it. All I did was find out your address, Sensei, then I. How do you know that? As always when confronted by a threat to village security, Kakashi was pure business and killing intent. Where the Junin of this village live is classified information. Naruto shrugged. Henge again. Walked into the postal section of the administration building, and before you say they should have seen through it, he shot down Sakura's question before she could ask it. My henges aren't like yours. I talked about it with Iruka-sensei. We figured out it must be because I've got so much chakra, like why I can't make regular clones. When I henge I actually change shape, it's not a genjutsu. Look, I'll show you. Don't hit me Sakura-chan, he said apologetically before, with a puff of smoke, his girl form appeared, modesty preserved by the ropes around her. See, in this form I'm actually a girl. Pull my hair. He, or she as he was claiming he was at the minute, nodded at the closest person and, dazed as much by the information as by a decently clad female version of Naruto appearing rather than the model that usually sent all men within eyeshot shooting backwards at all sorts of interesting angles, Sakura complied, seizing the golden braid before her and giving a swift yank. Yow. OWW. Ow. I meant gently. With another puff of smoke Naruto returned, pouting at his longtime crush. That hurt Sakura-chan. Yeah, sorry Naruto, the girl apologized before starting. That shouldn't happen. Henge's meant to be a genjutsu. Not for me it's not. The boy confirmed, grin back in place before he turned back to Kakashi a bit more seriously. But yes, I hanged into a postal ninja I'd seen around town, ducked into the back office and scanned through the address book. I've done it before when I need to know where someone I needed to prank lived or worked. When I knew where to go, I went there and, well, you left a window open. You broke in. Kakashi wasn't sure whether to be impressed, amused or angry. Why? Well, I knew what you were going to do and I had a plan to deal with it. I went in and, by the way, you need to work on your trap-making skills, he told the Junin solemnly, Kakashi raising an eyebrow as he did. If you want can give you some pointers. Check the forest about half a mile north of here if you don't believe me. I am slowly but surely losing the will to live. Is it too late to go nuke Nin already? Kakashi just about resisted the temptation to slap his face into his palm at the genin who continued to show up both him and the village at large. Naruto, I take it you got in without a problem then. Yep. They don't call me Uzumaki. Broke into the Hokage's tower and stole the forbidden scroll. Naruto for nothing. He confirmed before wrapping up his tale, but you left the bells Kuruda mentioned on the table by your bed, so I swiped them and had 2 shadow clones henge to replace them. After that, it was just a case of making the plant on Sakura-chan and the Tem, though you made that bit easy Kakashi-sensei. What was the jutsu you used on Sasuke? It looked really cool. Cool. The word echoed around the silent office like a gong of a funeral bell. He makes a monkey out of one of the elite Junin of the village and he calls it cool. No offense to Enma and the other pops. Asuma was quick to offer amends as memories of the last time he'd accidentally insulted the Monkey King rose up in his mind. A chastening experiencing it had been, a pleasant one it was not. Fortunately though the Hokage seemed too preoccupied with trying hard not to copy what Inuzuka-sum had done a month ago and fall into hysteria in his chair, though the grin on his face was unmistakable as he looked up at the copy nin. I should be surprised but, knowing Naruto, somehow I'm not. The aged leader spoke mirthfully, looking around the assembled and seeing expressions that ranged from hold in gut-busting laughter to thunderstruck shock and, in the case of a recently arrived academy instructor, deep pride in a student. So, what happened then? It seems to me that whichever way you slice it Naruto won, he got both the bells off you. True, but as I told, he didn't actually have them. This kid will go far. That thought was foremost in the copy ninja's mind as he beheld the roped-up form of his potential student. However, Though Naruto had shown a lot of promise and a mind of such devious cleverness, he was already making mental notes to ensure the jump-suited shinobi was never introduced to Anko. It was now the other two members of the team he had to check had the right stuff for his squad. Very impressive for a so-called dead last, Kakashi commented mildly, smiling with his one visible eye before pointing to the bells on the floor and in Sasuke's hand. But at the minute you don't have one of the bells you stole, so it looks like you're the one going back to the academy. But Kakashi-sensei, she seems to have the team ethic after all, and even Sasuke seems to be coming around. Hope was stirring around in the pit of Kakashi's stomach as Sakura stepped forwards, almost in front of her blonde-haired teammate. He got both the bells. She hastily corrected herself, retracting the finger she'd been about to point at her living deity and hanging her head as she carried on. I didn't do anything, nothing like what Naruto and Sasuke-kun did. I should go back. Wait. Before anything else could be said, Naruto's shout had brought all the attention back to him and made Sakura jump a foot in the air and 3 feet backwards. Sakura-chan, please don't say that. Look, Kakashi-sensei. The masked Junin looked up, putting his book in his equipment pouch as a mark of his sincerity to listen. I put the bells where they were for a reason. Mizuki Tem taught us all a lot at the academy, especially the taijutsu and survival sections. He taught me aside from the rest of the class a lot, because he looked away, face slowly reddening as he revealed how badly he'd been duped by the traitor. He said I needed help and he'd teach me different forms and different things from the others, but it was wrong, all of it. I was never any good in the academy spars and bottomed out the survival tests, and you just completely knocked 7 bells out of me just now. No pun intended. That got it. She's much prettier when she smiles and laughs, though even when she's hitting me she's cute. Naruto loved it when Sakura smiled, and he made sure it happened as often as possible when he was around, usually by clowning around or playing the fool that came so naturally to him. So I know I can't be a genin, not with skills like that. I'd be a liability, dangerous to my teammates because I couldn't defend myself properly. As a ninja, Kakashi respected many things. He respected honor, diligence, courage, skill and fighting spirit. Out of all things though, out of respect for his deceased team and sensei, he respected a team player, and Naruto, in saying those words as he just had, proved beyond all doubt in Kakashi's eyes that he would be the man to sacrifice anything, including his life and afterlife if necessary, to protect other people. For a brief instant the Junin didn't trust his voice. In fact, it was an effort to zone in to listen to the rest of what Naruto was saying. Iruka-sensei and I talked about it while we were talking about you. He said that if I didn't make it this time he'd give me some one-on-one teaching to try and get me up to speed for next time. So I don't really want to pass now. I know I'm not really ready. Besides, in an instant his frown was banished and a smirk was back on his face. Could you imagine what would happen if I sent the Tem back? The council would pitch a fit, and once Sakura-chan got through with me there wouldn't be enough left to cremate, let alone bury. And as Kami is my witness, I'm not sending Sakura-chan back, unless you want to end up dragging Sasuke-tem back from a D-rank mission in a body bag. They'd make a better team together than I would with either of them. Kakashi did nothing for a moment. He knew there was nothing he could do now. There was too much here to cover. Much as he wanted to pass this team, he knew these diamonds were too rough to cut it at the minute, even the supposed genius Uchiha. But at the same time, there was so much he could do with them after a little more polish had been applied. He needed time to think about this, and he couldn't do it in front of these genin. In the circumstances, he made the only decision that made any sense to him at the minute. Naruto yelped as he kunai buried itself in the ropes by his side. Cut him free and go home. All of you, report here at 9 tomorrow morning and do not be late. I'm not sure what to do with you all and haven't yet decided if you've passed, but you'll know tomorrow. Know this though. Everyone looked up. Even Sakura, from where she was trying to saw Naruto loose, pass or fail, you've come closer than anyone I've ever tested. With that, he gave an eye smile and vanished in smoke. I didn't leave, of course. I was in the trees to see what happened next. It was quite interesting. The copy nin spoke with his chin in his hand, seemingly ignorant of the thunderstruck expressions of his audience. Sakura got him loose and hugged him until he turned blue. And Sasuke, the eye smile was back in place. He threw him his bell. "Dobi or not, you earned this," I think were his exact words. "But, all that aside, what do you think I should do with them?" There was no answer for a moment, and Kakashi wasn't surprised. It was not too great to have a genin surprise a Junin with a particular skill or trick in these tests, but to hear a genin openly admit his deficiencies as Naruto had done was a rare occurrence indeed. It was only when the Hokage himself, after wiping what looked to be wet eyes on the sleeve of his ceremonial robes, spoke that the silence was broken completely. "The will of fire burns brightly in that boy, the flames of youth too, as Guy would say." The mention of the noble green beast of Konoha snapped everyone else out of their stupor and brought several flesh-crawling cringes that brought a smirk to the old man's lips before he continued. "Before I make any suggestions though, I take it you have a solution, Kakashi." The copy nin nodded. "With your permission, Lord Hokage, I would give them a deferred pass, if you will." Before anyone could interject, he'd outlined his plan. 6 months back at the academy to iron out their flaws, and then I'll take them on. No need for any further tests or anything like that. For this to work though, I'll need your help, Iruka-san. Finding himself addressed by a superior ninja, the Chunin snapped to attention. "What do you need, Kakashi-san?" "While they're at the academy, they'll need specific training. Naruto already knows his weaknesses and you know how to address them. If you need any further help, post him off to Guy. That'll make or break him." Kakashi gave his customary, youthful shudder. At this point, as memories of his eternal rival broke over him like a cold sweat, Sakura needs serious physical fitness training and someone to kick her out of being little more than a doormat for the Uchiha. "Kurenai, would you and Anko-san care to oblige?" The kunoichi knitted her delicate brows for a minute before a predatory smile broke over her face. "Oh, definitely. Send her my way after our team training, and Anko will see her whenever her schedule allows. If that doesn't do it, nothing will." "What about the Uchiha? Teamwork and shinobi ethics?" Kakashi said simply, folding his arms. "I've known Uchiha in the past and it was tragic what happened to them when Itachi went rogue. But Sasuke must learn he is not special. He will not be able to defeat Itachi alone, and the Sharingan is nothing more than a tool, a powerful one granted, but a tool nonetheless." "Well said, Kakashi. I see no reason for this approach not to be adopted, and I would be grateful to have you active in the ranks for a while longer. The number of missions has increased since the Wind Lord approached us again." The Hokage reasoned before a sudden thought occurred to him. "Before that though, the matter of Naruto's traps, you did see them, I assume?" That brought a chuckle from the elite Junin. "I did. The reason I didn't arrive here early, in fact. That boy is a trap maker extraordinaire. Almost tagged me a few times when I wandered into the area he pointed out. Took me about 3 shadow clones, a few substitutions, and almost all my shuriken and kunai just to get out of there alive. Give him a patch of ground and some basic ninja tools and you've got a nasty terrain piece to deal with." Just as well he didn't have any explosive notes on him at the time. Iruka smirked at this, as did several of the other Junin who'd seen the #1 prankster of Konoha at work through the years. "True, in that if nothing else the student has surpassed his teacher," the scarred man said with pride suffusing his tone. "By your leave, Hokage-sama, I shall go and plan the remedial classes for those who didn't make it this time." "Very well. In fact, I believe that concludes this year's Genin selection. Congratulations to the new Junin Sensei and 1 Junin Sensei to be. Good luck to you all. You are dismissed." The assembled Junin and Iruka bowed slightly and made to leave before they were all stopped by a sudden bellow of laughter. Looking over to see Aoba on doubled over and heaving with hysteria, the Hokage raised an eyebrow. Something wrong, Aoba-san. Unusually, as despite his joking nature Aoba was an exemplary shinobi, the Junin ignored his superior and stumbled towards Iruka. The Chunin had the look of a deer in the headlights as the taller man came to an ungainly halt in front of him and bowed deeply. Iruka, he has surpassed all of us. Hokage-sama. The man collapsed against his leader's desk, apparently heedless of his forehead protector grinding into the squelchy morass of damp paperwork that had accumulated, looking up at the older man with tear pouring from his eyes. Let me take him. Please let me take him on outside of missions when the academy's out. My team didn't pass and I'd kill for a shinobi like him to train. Oh, the T&I department wouldn't know what hit them. I'd have Anko on her knees and begging us to stop in a week. Surprise wasn't something Sarutobi was used to feeling, but he got over it with admirable haste and reasserted his authority over this bizarre situation. Aobi-san, control yourself and explain. Trying to comply, the Junin stood up, coughing into a hand that failed to hide how broad his grin was, and looked across at where Kakashi, who'd been leaving through the window as he usually did, was once more leaning against the door. Hi Hokage-sama, but I think a visual demonstration is in order. Kakashi-san. The named ninja looked up at his name. You got tagged, in a big way you got tagged, turn around. Stupidly, as the copy nin would later berate himself, Kakashi did just that. As the entire room behind him simply dissolved into giggles, he realized immediately something was up. Turning back around to see all his peers in various stages of mirth and laughter, the former Anbu captain raised an eyebrow and reached behind his back. His spine froze when it came into contact with paper. No, it can't be. All those traps, all to try and prank me. With a tug he dislodged the slip from his back and brought it up in front of him, only to go suddenly pale and silent, swear of bloody, furious revenge against the prankster known as Uzumaki Naruto. It was a piece of paper framing a photograph that had been stuck onto it with tape, a photograph that Kakashi had sworn would never see the light of day as long as he was alive. In it, sitting in a high chair and staring at the camera with an apparently affronted expression, was a baby with short, sticking up silver hair and what looked like chocolate smeared liberally all over his lower face and both hands, hiding the features completely. It was the baby photo from hell, and Kakashi knew there was only one way Naruto could have gotten hold of it. Looks like he didn't just check out my bedside table during his impromptu smash and grab job, though the caption underneath the picture was definitely original. Pudding or no pudding. ... The mask stays on. 6 months. Iruka. Aoba. The whisper sliced through the atmosphere of laughter and piled up bodies. Even if the way kunai had fallen against Hayate and was almost crying into his shoulder from laughing so hard was certainly suggestive, the elite Junin was feeling far too bloody-minded to mention it as he made his dire promise of a lifetime, 6 months to train Uzumaki Naruto, then his is mine. Deception is the way of the ninja. If an opponent believes you to be an idiot and an incompetent, he'll be most surprised when you reveal your full potential, and surprises, especially those involving kunai, shuriken, jutsus or impressive taijutsu of any kind, have a nasty habit of being very fatal for those involved. In following this line of thinking, there was one true exponent of the ideal of deception, though he had recently taken on a pupil who he hoped would follow in his footsteps as soon as he actually developed the skills to back up his ridiculous exterior. Regardless of his follower, however, everyone who had ever met him would immediately agree that, bumbling fool and lech though he might have appeared to be, in the middle of a life or death struggle there was no one you'd want on your side more. The Jiraiya of the Sannin. An example of the Toad Sage's faux idiocy was his sleeping habits. As Naruto continually complained on a daily basis, it generally took nothing less than an exploding tag in each ear hole to get the old pervert moving in the morning. However, Jiraiya was a ninja and had from a very young age developed a hair-trigger sense of getting up and out in the blink of an eye, though this was more out of indulging his vices than any formal training despite Sarutobi-sensei's best efforts. More than one brothel madam, innocent servant or irate father had blundered into a comely young lady's room in time to catch a glimpse of Jiraiya's backside rapidly vacating the premises through a convenient window. He chose to play possum in the morning simply because he had the choice to and liked to sleep in, not to mention it wound his student up something chronic, and that was a good enough reason both in and of itself. However, given the appropriate stimulus, the Gamma Sennin was guaranteed to be combat ready in an instant. A girly shriek of terror echoing through the night more than counted as an appropriate stimulus. Naruto. He hadn't been there for his godson's early life, but he'd be damned if he screwed it up now. Minato's legacy would become the legend the Yellow Flash had always said he would be, or Jiraiya swore he would throw himself into the Shinigami's stomach to let the Yondaime kick his willingly with a smile on his face. Throwing himself out of his sleeping bag and not even bothering to take the large toad-shaped sleeping cap off his head, a habit, he noted with equal parts hilarity and pride, that Naruto seemed to have taken up even from a young age. The older nin sprinted towards the source of the cry, inwardly cursing at the same time as trying to work out why Naruto would have snuck out to train again. Had yesterday's brush with Akatsuki taught him nothing? He'd nearly been captured by Itachi and Kisame. Only dumb luck and lots of it had saved both him and Sasuke from death, or, in the Jinchuriki's case, a fate worse than death, according to the report Guy had gasped at him prior to dragging a chagrined Sasuke back to Konoha. Stupid Gaki. The Toad Sage berated himself before focusing on the matter at hand. If it's one of the Red Dawn, I will make sure the sun goes down on them this day. Huh, what's that? Stumbling to a halt, the ninja master focused more chakra to his ears and listened into the conversation he could hear his student having. Realizing Naruto was not in danger anymore, Jiraiya began to plot ways of making him pay for losing precious minutes of sleep, at the same time as try to figure out who the fox-containing boy was taking to. "Oh, okay. You're not slicing me. That's good, right? You need more. No problem, I got plenty to spare. If these are his pickup lines, he needs more help than I can give him." The thought made the Toad Sage smile before listening in again. Though in the realms of womanly affection, there is no greater master than the legendary Jiraiya. Man, did that guy ever feed you? No wonder you went for me. It must have been like throwing a starving Akamichi into an all-you-can-eat barbecue buffet. Okay, that's enough. Deciding to announce himself before things could go too far, Jiraiya strode into the small clearing Naruto must have found for himself and his lady friend, one hand pushing the ferns and branches out the way while the other fingered his trusty notepad. Just in case, Gaki, you have a lot to learn about wooing the fairer, if that was the... It was at that point Jiraiya looked over at the source of the soft giggling he'd heard earlier, and all the words died in his throat. The sight of some hideous, spiky thing resting across his student's lap was enough to make him wince, even if it didn't appear to be doing the boy any harm. Looking up in alarm, Naruto calmed down when he saw the flabbergasted form of the older ninja. "Hey Arrow Sennin," he greeted casually. "Oh sweet Kami, that thing can move." Seeing the monster shift its bulbous, spined head as though sniffing him out made Jiraiya feel queasy, almost ill enough to miss the last of his student's statement. "Sorry if I woke you up earlier, but it's okay now. I think she likes me." With that, Naruto simply ran his free hand over some of the spines on the back of this beast's back, and Jiraiya swore he could see the thing sigh at the caress. Tearing his eyes from the disturbing spectacle, the Toad Sage grated his next words. "Explain. Now." Naruto raised an eyebrow at the request, and the gesture was enough to break Jiraiya's fragile temper. "What the hell is that thing, and where did it come from?" Hey. Seeing the traditional Naruto grin and back of the head scratch, Jiraiya groaned and slapped a hand over his face. He'd seen that look before, and it never boded well. "Well, yesterday I may have told a little fib." "Well, tell me the truth now." His mentor sighed, knowing it was no use getting angry and crying over spilt milk now. I'm not angry but I'm curious. In that case get your notebook out, Sannin. To his surprise, Naruto, rather than shrinking and mumbling his report like he usually did when he'd done something wrong, he was grinning wider than ever and stroking the beast on his leg with more vigor than before. It's moving, I swear that thing can scuttle. What the hell is it? This'll make your next porn novel a bestseller. Believe it. Naruto was naturally a cheerful person, but that didn't mean he wasn't also naturally cautious. Years of living in a village where people treat you, at best, as a walking natural disaster waiting to happen will breed a streak of paranoia in even the most sunshine-filled soul. That same streak had been subconsciously pinging away ever since he and Jiraiya had come to this town, had really started sounding alarm bells when the Toad Sage had left to go chasing tail end. Now that he'd sensed two of the largest chakra presences he'd ever felt heading straight towards the room he'd rented in Jiraiya's name, it was screaming at him to do something drastic. The only problem was that, in the face of a rising panic, right now his mind was a blank. Oh shit, oh hell, I'm too young to see Sandaime Gigi again. Part of the reason he'd agreed to go on this mission had been to make his adopted grandfather proud of him wherever Sarutobi was in the afterlife. It had hurt to be at the old man's graveside, but that pain had been tempered by the knowledge that he was going to recruit the Sandaime's successor and that the old man had gone out protecting his village and had crippled the man who'd killed him almost beyond repair. The image of the kind old teacher helped calm him somewhat as he breathed rapidly, trying to figure out what to do next. They're ninja, they've got to be, and the only person I've met with bigger chakras than them is Sannin. They've got to be after me. No way they'd come here first if they were after him. What do? I can't outfight them, and the second I try to run they'll be all over me like bugs on Shino and fleas on Kiba. Out of desperation and the knowledge that he needed any kind of an edge here, he triggered chakra to his ears like Kakashi had taught him and listened, drowning out the pain as other noises of life battered his heightened senses to listen in. Focus. I know it hurts, but focus. Wait, I know that voice, but it's not him, so it has to be. The knowledge he was listening to one of the Leaf's most infamous traitor Nin filled him with dread, even more so when there was a polite knock on the door and he knew who waiting for him behind the simple plank of wood. But even as he stood there, the fear began to drain away. An idea, a truly crazy, mad idea dredged up from the very depths of his desperation to survive bloomed in his mind, and he broke the shackles of terror on his limbs. After all, he decided with a shrug as he smiled shyly and decided he didn't have anything better to go on at the minute, so he'd give this a go. After all, winding up Uchiha was one of Naruto's pet hobbies at home, and if nothing else it might give whoever was with Itachi a good laugh before the missing Nin killed him in a suitably brutal and stomach-churning manner. Come on, Itachi. The ass of blue-skinned half-shark made a concerted attempt to sound wheedling. Just one leg. No, came the monotone reply, the Uchiha turning his head just enough to see the Kiri missing Nin from the corner of his eye. If we damage the vessel we may damage the Biju and make the sealing process even more arduous. Grinning at the same time as hefting his infamous blade over his shoulder, Kisame smirked as his partner knocked on their next victim's door. Ah, but where's the fun in life if it's not a challenge? I hate getting bored. After the Kyuubi is taken we will request another Biju, one in an experienced host. That should give you enough of a challenge. Ah. Hearing the door open, the former Leaf Nin turned towards the Jinchuriki. Uzumaki Naruto, you will come with us now. There was a long moment of silence, one that Itachi had expected. After all, their target was only a boy of the Leaf, an unusually strong one it was true, but still a boy likely stunned into shock to stand in the presence of such an infamous figure in the Leaf's history. Realizing he wasn't going to get an answer, Itachi sighed softly and reached forwards to grab his target before the paralysis wore off. Dude, do you have any idea how creepy that sounded? Itachi blinked, his hand frozen as it appeared their roles were reversed. Suddenly the genin before him was animated and he was stood as still as stone, only able to listen as Naruto went on. Come on. Asking a young boy to come with you. Man, that sounds like something Orochimaru would try to pull. He's always giving them gifts. It must be a nin thing. All the powerful nin I know have got something wrong with them. Ero Sennin's a pervert. Kakashi Sensei's a pervert and he's always late. Guy Sensei's always running around screaming about youth and Orochimaru. He seemed to shudder at the thought of the snake nin. Let's not go there. Is that it? The secret to power is to let out your inner pervert, slacker or other vices, and bang, all of a sudden you're Sannin level. Kisami's shoulders started to shake. I mean, Naruto carried on, seemingly oblivious to his audience while internally he was both praying for Jiraiya to get his act together and pull off a dramatic rescue and praying neither of the two missing nins looked over his shoulder to see what a couple of his clones were up to in the room. It must be me. I must have a sign over my head or something that says, Uchiha lover. Sasuke's just the same. Itachi's eyes widened at the mention of the brother he'd abandoned, but before he could get a word in edgeways Naruto had simply steamrollered over him. Still, I guess I should have seen this coming. He sighed melodramatically. Ever second precious to him as he carried on. He takes after you in so many ways. You know, tall, dark, brooding, and the personality of a half-brick in a sock. I suppose it's only natural his tastes developed similar to yours. Kisame was forced to turn his back on the scene. Man, is this guy made of porcelain or something? It was working on the taller of the two as far as Naruto can see and hear, the muffled snorts of laughter coming from the back of the broad cloak giving the game away there. But Itachi seemed unmoved and Naruto was starting to sweat as he was starting to run out of material. He reached back into his mind for something else to go for and internally praying for a miracle when, just for once in his life, Kami took pity on him and sent an angel of mercy to guide him in this time of need. Itachi. Today is the day I avenge our clan. Thank you, Sasuke. There was a first time for everything, and gratitude for the tem of his class was definitely a first for Naruto. Right now though he was desperate enough to take what he could get, and to that end, before this whole thing devolved into fisticuffs and both he and Sasuke got their collective behinds beaten black and blue, he slapped a palm over his eyes and turned back towards Itachi, his tone long-suffering and tired. See what I mean? Even after leaving Konoha I can't get rid of him. You know, Sasuke. After dragging his hand down his face, he let his voice rise and cut through the younger Uchiha's posturing. If you keep chasing after me, people are really going to wonder if you're serious about resurrecting your clan. I can help with your ninja skill, your eating habits, blasphemer against the ramen gods that you are, and hell, I could even have a go at changing your warm and sunny personality. However, I draw the line at us attempting procreation. It'll take a lot more than you copying and using my sexy jutsu for me to see you as anything more than just a friend. By now Kisame was leaning on the wall opposite him, hunched over and hammering on the plasterboard with unreleased laughter juddering through his body. As Sasuke stood thunderstruck in the hallway, even his hatred for his brother buried under the shock of his blonde teammates' insinuations, Naruto capitalized on his advantage and looked Itachi directly in the eye. In shock, the Uchiha had failed to activate his Sharingan. I don't blame you. In fact, I'm flattered, and I'll even admit it as a casual observer. You both really pull off the Bishonen look. You really make it work well for you, but it just doesn't do anything for me. Sorry to break your heart like this, but still, look on the bright side. There are other fish in the sea. No offense, Big and Blue. Even if Kisame heard him, the shark man was too far gone in holding back an outright breakdown into hysterics for the comment to register. You'll find the right person eventually. Just keep those red eyes open and a pout on your lips, and whammo, they'll be under your spell the second they let you get close enough. For now though, I've had a rough day, so I'm going back to bed. With that, he slammed the door shut, nodded to his clones, and began to frantically prepare his survival plan for the next few minutes. Well, that was unique. Seeing the target quite literally shut the door on him like that was a first for the elder of the Uchiha siblings, though he discounted the Jinchuriki's earlier comments as false. Truly you are Konoha's #1 surprising ninja Uzumaki Naruto. And there is the other annoyance to deal with as well. From the corner of his eye he could see his younger brother, still as foolish as he had been all those years ago, overcoming his surprise and getting ready to attack. Swiftly analyzing the situation and reminding himself that murdering your partner was much frowned upon in the Akatsuki, even if said partner was currently bluer than usual in the face and biting holes in his cloak to stop himself laughing, Itachi made his commands. Kisame, detain the target while I deal with Sasuke. My brother requires another lesson. For a second he was unsure if the Kiri-nin heard him, but as Kisame stood up tall and rubbed his eyes with his free hand, he was relieved to see the taller man nod his consent. Damn! The former member of the Seven Swordsmen shook his head as one hand curled around the handle of Samahata. As corny as this sounds, I really am going to regret this. Too true. Kid should have been a court jester rather than a nin. Can't remember the last time I had a laugh like that. With the memory of the recent monologue running through his mind, the half-shark brought his leg back and casually booted the door in, sending splinters everywhere. Unfortunately, distracted as he was by his current good mood, it never even crossed Kisami's mind that his target might have taken precautions to defend himself, and he therefore left himself open to the attack that hit him full in the face. As any good prankster should, Naruto always kept a scroll full of his pranking material close at hand. After all, you never knew when inspiration for a really good prank would strike, and there was nothing more frustrating than having the perfect plan mapped out in front of you but nothing to pull it off with. As Kisame cleared the threshold of the hotel room, he found this out the hard way as a balloon filled with ink caught him full in the mush and burst open. Though when diluted in water the ink was harmless, Naruto never intentionally incorporated anything that would hurt in his pranks just in case he hit the wrong person. Concentrated, it was a nasty skin irritant. It also didn't do much for the eyes either if the way Kisame suddenly howled like a baby and clutched a hand to his face was anything to go by. Casually deflecting Sasuke's rage-empowered blow with his elbow, Itachi had to catch himself from sighing and wondering what else was going to go wrong on this mission. That's it, kid, I'm ripping your legs off. Former funny comments forgotten, Kisame raged as he took wild one-handed swings with his weapon. Naruto ducked under one of the Sharkmon's blows and made some hand seals that were immediately swallowed up by Itachi's revealed Sharingan. You're looking a bit green around the gills there. Had he not been slightly preoccupied with dodging and parrying his brother's offense, Itachi would have groaned at the lame pun at the same time as applaud the blonde shinobi for being able to throw his voice like that to confuse and misdirect his blinded opponent. Clear the decks. Medical emergency, we've got a sick shark here. There is a puff of smoke that quickly cleared to reveal a female Naruto clad in a nurse outfit that left little to the imagination. A henge, but why? Itachi pondered the question as he casually caught his brother's lightning-encased fist and punched just above his elbow with his free hand, deadening Sasuke's arm and dispersing the technique. He caught his younger brother by the collar and hefted him from the floor in time to hear the last of Naruto's words. Quote, Nurse Naruto to the rescue. Calm down, Kisame-san. Be a good boy and you might get a lollipop. The shark man bellowed in rage, the noise making both Uchiha brothers look over at the ongoing fight and forget their quarrel for a minute. Forget the legs, everything below the waist is getting fed to Samahata, piece by piece. Now calm down. Itachi wondered for a minute why Naruto had given away his position by not throwing his voice again. When the answer arrived a second later, however, he found himself regretting his curiosity. I said. The hangboy hopped back, the tip of the legendary blade ruffling the midriff of her uniform before dodging back inside Kisami's swing. Cool off. There is a school of thought in the ninja world that states emotions make a shinobi weak. However, Konoha as a majority did not subscribe to this belief and therefore taught its children to experience all the emotions life can bring. In addition, many emotions such as fear, Rage and anger, to say nothing of the desire to protect something you love, can empower anyone to heights they never dreamed they could tap. Hyuga Hinata's performance in the Chunin exams, gaining a glancing hit on her seemingly invincible prodigy of a cousin to prove herself to the one she fanned a flame for, was proof enough of that. Sasuke's hatred for the man that had massacred his family was another, albeit darker, font of strength he could draw from. But regardless of the depths of his hatred, there are some experiences even more primal, causing such bonding between humans of the same that they can smother all emotions and force even mortal enemies to react in a set, predetermined pattern. Therefore it should have been no surprise to anyone involved that when Uzumaki Naruto's hanged foot landed with surgical precision in Hoshigaki Kisami's groin, 2/3 of the remaining Sharingan eyes in the world simultaneously watered in sympathy for the missed nin. Sasuke even winced and added a small "ooh" to the proceedings. Kisame for his part simply collapsed, Samahata clattering to the floor as the missed nin's face went from ocean blue to swamp water green, both his eyes and mouth open to their fullest extent. Both hands grabbing the new sun of pain that had eclipsed all other sensations in his world, he fell to his knees and came eye to streaming eye with the one responsible for this agony. "There, that wasn't so bad," she grinned before leaning forwards. "Now stick out your tongue and say, 'Ah, I'm gonna kill you, kid.'" The threat would have sounded more impressive if the one administering it wasn't talking in a voice that would have put a falsetto choir girl to shame. Seeing his partner incapacitated in such a below-the-belt manner, literally as well as figuratively, Itachi felt his patience finally snap. Casually flinging Sasuke over Kisami's head and into the room, the Leaf Trader seized the hanged Naruto by the back of her uniform and brought her up to eye level, Sharingan spinning and morphing into the deadly Mangekyo form. "No, put me down, bad bishi," Naruto scolded before seeing the transformation of Itachi's eyes and grabbing for her top, yanking it downwards. "Uh-oh, flash no jutsu." Itachi would have scoffed and claimed he was immune to such a crass technique, but the fact of the matter was that he was a man. He had urges that most of the time he suppressed very well, and it was a very convincing henge Naruto had come up with. A combination of these reasons meant that for an instant his eyes were diverted from their original target. He had just enough time to notice the small strip of paper nestled between a relatively generous bosom before the tag went off and the world turned white. Sasuke had been caught in the brightness as well, but, as he'd been trying to recover his breath and had his eyes half shut, to say nothing of the fact he was partially shielded behind Kisami's still kneeling bulk, meant he was only dazzled by the tag rather than blinded by it. He still felt battered and light-headed from the lack of air, but pushed himself upright regardless, hatred alone forcing him upright. Now was the chance to kill his brother, regardless of Naruto's interference. He glanced across, palming for a kunai, just in time to see the figure dropped by Itachi's reeling form vanish in smoke before he felt himself move against his will, as though someone had wrapped a thin twine around his waist and given it a hard yank. What? Where the? Ah! Gravity being the annoyance it was, Sasuke found himself falling down the side of a building with no idea how he'd got there. Instinct took over and he adhered to the nearby surface with chakra, just in time to see another Naruto grab his hand and whisper urgently, "His clones, he must have pulled me out the building with a substitution jutsu. Can you run?" Yes, but..." There was a sudden pull on his wrist and he was nearly jerked off his feet again. "Then do it. That tag won't keep them busy for long and either of them could kill us blinded anyway." But the bright dots imposed on his vision were playing tricks on his, as it looked like Naruto had to wrestle a shiny white something into a pouch of his before carrying on. Itachi is going to be really pissed off when he can see again. Naruto cut him off as he jumped the last 6 feet to the floor, looking around for the next way to run. "He just owned you now, even with Chidori. You think he'll give you a chance now he's just been pranked?" That was a valid point. Despite his pride, Sasuke was intelligent enough to know when he was beaten. though the fact his brother had defeated him so effortlessly was a bitter pill from him to swallow. Still, his eyesight was mostly regained. He was in a position to run. There was just an annoyingly large green blob that had attached itself to the left and was moving forward slowly, heading towards the lobby of the hotel they'd just abandoned. In fact, now that he saw it clearer, it looked like something he remembered, a lot like Guy-sensei. The Junin looked up just as Naruto turned around, still straining at Sasuke's hand to get him moving again. Next second the two of them were moving together faster than either of them could have moved alone. Forsaking stealth for speed, Guy had seen the target he'd been sent to retrieve and took off, grabbing a boy in each hand and tearing for the outskirts of the town to put some distance between Naruto and the two who were hunting him. Buildings blurred past and the wind howled in his ears as the taijutsu master ran and didn't look back, as preoccupied with his route and dodging civilians as his new charges were with keeping the last meals contained below their esophaguses. None of the three hearing as, from the building they'd just abandoned, a final roar of mingled rage and shock echoed across the town. Guy hadn't stopped running for hours, setting a furious pace away from the little town Naruto had come into earlier that day and stopping only when the sun was starting to set. Looking back with his chest heaving, the Leaf Junin set his charges down. Yosh, that should be enough to lose them. Neither Sasuke nor Naruto were in a fit state to answer. The nausea of the high-speed trip had made both boys lose their lunch, breakfast and was currently delving for last night's supper. Now we must hope our flames of youth burn bright enough to light the way for Jiraiya-sama to find us. No need, Naruto managed to croak out after flopping onto his back. Tracking seal, in my sock, he'll find us. There was a sudden ribbit from the side of him as a frog hopped into the clearing. A second later, all three watched on as a hand, then an arm, then the rest of Jiraiya emerged slimily from the toad's innards. Even Guy looked grossed out by that one, though he managed to avoid disgracing himself like Sasuke and Naruto did. Ah, sorry about that, but I had to get here fast. The sage apologized before his voice took on a hard edge and he folded his massive arms. Naruto, what happened back there? The Gaki shot him a filthy glare and pouted. Because you had to go out researching, I had to get away from his. He jerked a hand towards Sasuke, older brother, a big blue mist nin called Kisame. That got a response. For a minute he thought his current teacher would faint, but Jiraiya managed to keep his composure and merely asked, "How?" "Clones and a flash tag." Naruto shot back shortly. Then me and Sasuke pegged it out of there before they recovered and ran into Guy-sensei. He got us here. Unusually the Junin merely nodded, face serious as Jiraiya finally seemed to notice the Uchiha in the party. "Sasuke, what are you doing here anyway?" "Itachi and his partner were in Konoha. Kakashi is in hospital because of them. I knew he was following you, so I followed him to avenge my clan." Jiraiya considered this for a minute, finger on his chin, before nodding at the Uchiha. "I understand. He just left it long enough to let the Uchiha look smug before delivering the cutting line, 'You are an idiot.'" Naruto had to clamp a hand over his mouth at the expression of his teammate as Jiraiya tore into him. "You wanted to take on Itachi Uchiha, the man who destroyed an entire clan of ninja in one night, as a genin with one, maybe two, jutsu over B rank. That's not a plan for anything other than suicide. Itachi does not care how skilled you think you are, or even that he's your brother. If you get in his way, he will kill you. Get it through your head. You are not strong enough to even think about taking on a water clone of Itachi yet. You need years of training and a backup team before you can try to avenge your kin." But nothing. This time Naruto spoke, surprising those involved and making Sasuke curl his lip derisively. "Look, Tem, back there, you got the hell beaten out of you. I got us out of there and I'm the only reason we got out of there, right or wrong?" Sasuke glowered at the reminder but eventually had to confess. "Right. Okay. Progress. Want to know how I did that? How I pulled one over on your brother?" It's easy. I didn't do what he told me to do. I did something different and it caught him flat-footed, exactly what you haven't been doing all these years. What did he say, Sasuke? On that night, what did he tell you to do? I know he said something. It was chucked around the academy enough, and some of the others there had family in high places. The last loyal Uchiha said nothing for a minute but seemed to be thinking over Naruto's words. This in itself was a sign of progress as far as the blonde was concerned, as he suspected Sasuke hadn't taken a blind bit of notice of anything he'd said for the past 14 or so years. The onyx-eyed child looked away but eventually spoke in a grating whisper. Hate. His answer began. He said to hate him and grow strong. Then I could stand before him when I had the same eyes he did. And you believed him? Naruto slapped his forehead. It was either that or he was certain he'd slap Sasuke. For Kami's sake, they call me Adobe. Just think about this, Sasuke. Use that genius brain of yours. Itachi kills your clan and leaves you, a potential rival, right? So what's he going to do to make sure you don't grow into a threat to him? How about tell you exactly what not to do in the hope you're dumb enough to listen to him, and guess what, he was right. You've swallowed the crap he told you without even thinking about it, and it's led you to this. He gestured with his hand, measuring the Uchiha up and down, rushing in without thinking, trying to take on a superior opponent from the front with an assassination jutsu. The clues in the title genius. Suddenly he felt tired, exhausted by what he'd just done and the fact that he'd got away with it. He did not have time to put up with Sasuke now. Go back to Konoha, we'll bring back this Tsunade and heal up Kakashi. Just remember this though, if you keep listening to Itachi and using hatred to grow strong, eventually someone or something. He pointed towards a spot on the other boy's neck. Sasuke, reflexively flinching to cover up the curse seal of Orochimaru, is going to tempt you away from Konoha. When that happens, someone is going to have to stop you leaving, and that will probably have to be me. Sasuke would have scoffed at this. Naruto had been lucky earlier. That was the only reason he was still alive. On an equal footing, Sasuke knew he would crush the Uzumaki into paste all day long. However, looking into the eyes suddenly full of a brilliant blue fire, backed up with a will that simply did not know how to say the word quit, the loyal Uchiha found himself a little less sure of his victory than he would have liked as the other ninja finished his impromptu speech. Don't make me choose between my friend and my village, Sasuke. Naruto's words were calm and measured, but the underlying threat was unmistakable, because I'm not sure what my answer would be. Sasuke wasn't sure what to say to that, so said nothing, merely shrugging and not reacting as Guy put a hand on his shoulder tentatively. Come, Sasuke-kun, we have to go back to Konoha now. Sasuke nodded before, just as he was about to turn away, he paused unexpectedly. Hey Dobi. Naruto looked up at his unofficial name. For the save back there, Sasuke knew this was going to hurt, but he could do nothing but try to stomach his pride this time around. Thanks. Now that was unexpected. Naruto honestly couldn't remember the last time Sasuke had apologized to him, or to anyone else for that matter, but he'd take what he could get and decided to leave it at that. Anytime, Tem. It's what friends are for after all. Anyway, when you get back, tell Sakura-chan I'm okay and we'll be back with Ero Sennin's teammates soon. Sasuke nodded and wordlessly turned towards Guy, dogging the older man's footsteps as the green beast of Konoha started making tracks back towards the Leaf Village. Naruto watched them go before turning to Jiraiya, fingering something in one of his pouches before looking up at the sage. So, was she worth it? That wasn't the first question the Gamma Sennin had anticipated. The girl, Naruto explained with a long-suffering air. You know, the one you were after while I was taking care of a couple of S-rank nuke nins. Over. Well, Jiraiya thought it prudent not to mention to his student that he'd been had by a genjutsu cast over the woman. The last thing he needed now was to give Naruto any more ammunition after the boy had just done his protection job for him. Yes, she was a rare beauty, but as soon as I heard of your distress I had to leave her and come running to your Che. Save the fiction for your Ika Ika Ero Sennin. There was a sudden thump, followed by a yelp of pain. I don't care how many nuke nins you run away from, stop calling me that. So, Jiraiya hadn't written a word down, but it didn't matter. He was certain this story was one he was never going to forget for the rest of his life. You're telling me you managed to escape, with your teammate, from 2S rank missing nins, including probably the strongest traitor to ever come out of Konoha, using a couple of shadow clones, a balloon filled with ink, a flash tag and your sexy jutsu. Naruto nodded at the succinct summary. Pretty much, he commented breezily, one hand continually caressing one of the spines of the creature still draped over his lap. Hearing the thing sigh again at the attention, Jiraiya pointed his pen at the still nameless monster. So how does that? Is it growling at me? Noticing the change in pitch, Naruto's face grew hard. Probably. Oi, he said, an air of annoyance about him as he flicked one of the spines sharply. No growling at Ero Sennin, he's a friend. Suitably chastised, the thing seemed to settle back down, though Jiraiya had a suspicion it was somehow keeping an eye on him as Naruto spoke again, both hands behind his head and a pleased grin on his face. Happened when I dragged Sasuke out the room. After all, Kisame had just threatened to chop my legs off, so I thought, he'll have a hard job if he's got nothing to cut with. Oh no, not even he would. Jiraiya had a sinking feeling in his gut that only got worse as his student's smile broadened, so I made a second clone and had it substitute at the same time the other one did with Sasuke, managed to seal her into a scroll while he was still blinking spots out his eyes. Okay. He spoke to the thing on his lap, enough for now, back to what you used to be. The Toad Sage was so desperate for his guess to be wrong, but, as the spikes receded and fanged grins seemed to meld together into another, more recognizable form, he buried his face in his hands and despaired. Samahata. Ashen-faced, he looked up at his pupil again, not believing Naruto would do something so simultaneously brilliant and stupid. You stole, Samahata. Naruto, do you know what that sword even is? I know it was hungry, the blonde shinobi said nonchalantly as he stood up. Poor thing, no wonder it ate everyone's chakra like there was no tomorrow. Kisame must have kept her starving on purpose to do that. Now I owe him another kick in the nuts. Having said his piece, the Hokage to be grabbed the handle of his new weapon and, with a grunt of effort, placed it awkwardly on his shoulder before looking at his mentor. Coming Ero Sennin. I'm a bit tired, Samahata. Have to see if I can change that name. I don't like it. Anyway, she really took it out of me so I could use a lie down. Overwhelmed by miracles, Jiraiya simply nodded dumbly and stood up, his voice deadened as he asked another question that had become obvious to him. Naruto, how can you even pick that sword up? It should stab anyone but Kisame who tries to use it. He grinned ruefully, holding up his left hand and displaying the palm. Even with his healing factor, Jiraiya could see recent lacerations in his skin that hadn't fully regenerated yet. She did at first. Even when I sealed her in a scroll the first time she slashed me a few times, he griped before patting the pommel of the legendary blade. I was out here trying to figure out why when I channeled some of my other chakra. Jiraiya nodded to show he understood. Despite being what he was, Kyuubi was still a sore subject for Naruto to discuss, just to see what would happen. That was probably what woke you up. Samahata transformed into that sword you saw and it caught me a bit off guard, but since then she just took a couple of bites out of my chakra and we've been good. Only you, Naruto. He already knew the boy could win over hearts and minds like no one else he knew. It was the reason he decided to take the Gaki along on this trip in the first place, but this was something else. Only you could pilfer a missed nin's sword and make it yours in the space of less than a night. Still numb but with ideas and questions pouring through his mind at a rapid rate of knots, mostly involving just how powerful Naruto was likely to become with that blade now backing up his already monstrous chakra reserves. One last thing about his student's recent speech made him pause and then shudder suddenly. Nay, Naruto, the shinobi looked over both his shoulder and Samahata's blade as Jiraiya fought to master his voice. How do you know that blade is a she? To his relief the brat looked perplexed before shrugging. Tenten-chan always said most swords have female names and I wasn't sure what this one was called, so she's got to be a she. Oh, I never thought of that. A devious grin flitted across his lips for a minute. I've got to show her this when I get back. She'll go green with envy. No, scratch green, she'll turn puce seeing me with a legendary sword. Filled with a cackling glee, Naruto headed for his bed, not noticing as Jiraiya behind him paused and turned thankful eyes to the heavens. It's just a convention, not a fact. Breathing out a sigh of relief, he gave the back of Samahata a last wary glance before following after his student. After what I've seen tonight, that'd be a date even I wouldn't want to go on.